Hunters, welcome back to another Flush 'em and Dust 'em podcast. This podcast is going to feature Jennifer Wapenski. She works with and is part of Project Upland, Hunting Dog Confidential, and she currently owns 2 Deutsch Langhaars. So I actually was, after Nick got his poodle pointer, I just started researching some of the versatile hunting breeds that are out there, and NAVHDA has they have them named the German long-haired pointer. But that breed kind of interested me, and I came across Jennifer's profile on Instagram and saw that they had some pups, and we had a conversation on the phone a few weeks back just to learn more about that breed in general. And it's very intriguing, but we're going to take it over to Jennifer to introduce herself, and we're going to dive into that breed even more and what brought them to running Deutsch Longhairs. So Jennifer, if you want to introduce yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Sure, you bet. Yeah, and the fact that you landed on the breed and on me says that you were definitely doing some research, because it's not a breed that most people have run across. And typically, if people hear about it, it's because they're really digging in and doing their homework. So it's always a fun conversation to have. But
yeah, for sure.
My name's Jennifer Wapenski. I work the director of operations for Project Upland, and I edit the Hunting Dog Confidential magazine, co-host the Hunting Dog Confidential podcast with Craig Koshik. So I am very fortunate to have a front row seat to somebody who is just a walking encyclopedia of bird dogs, and particularly of versatile pointing dogs. So I've really enjoyed just getting to work with Craig and to tap into his knowledge and just wind him up and point him in a direction and let him go. But I'm the breed warden for the Deutsch Langhaar Club of North America, which all that means is our dogs have to be certified before they can be bred. You can't just take one dog, breed it to another, and call them Deutsch Langhaars. So I review the paperwork to make sure that dogs are meeting all the requirements for breeding, and then sign off on the breedings that take place and kind of handle all the paperwork. So it's a fancy title, but it's just overseeing which dogs we are qualifying to breed for the future of the breed in North America.
Nice. What are some of the requirements for the Deutsch Langhaar to continue breeding or to be bred?
So in order to be certified for breeding, either a male or female must pass their puppy test, which is very similar to a NAVHDA natural ability. It's called the VJP. And then the dog must also pass their fall test, which is done that same year at the end of the summer or beginning of fall following their puppy test. That's called the HZP. And in NAVHDA terms, it's fairly similar to like a UPT, a utility prep test, where there's no field steadiness required, but there's a lot of water work. It's a lot of retrieving work. They need to do a blind. They need to do a search behind the duck. I know NAVHDA people are familiar with that too. So pass those 2 tests, one in the spring, one in the fall, and it's time critical. So a dog is eligible to run those tests only in the summer after they're born. So that's their one time to do it. So the system really does favor early maturity, early development. So you can't come back later and attempt that test at 3, 4, or 5 years old. It's just those dogs are typically, for that fall test, they're up to, but generally not more than 2 years old.
Oh, wow.
And then, those 2 performance tests, we do a breed show, which is a confirmation evaluation. It's not a show in the sense of, we crown a champion. It's a pass fail. So we have confirmation judges that look at each dog and make sure their structure and their form and their coat and their type is all correct. So the dog must pass that. They must be marked loud on furred game, which is usually going to be a rabbit or a hare. So either sight or scent doesn't matter, but they have to have been marked loud. They must have their hips evaluated, so they can't have any hip dysplasia. And then they also have to pass the hardness test, which is dispatching a predator. So raccoon, feral cat, fox, that sort of thing. Every breeding Deutsch Langhaar has to have dispatched a predator. So all those things together, and then part of it's temperament too. At a test, the judges are not only evaluating the dog, doing the field search and the pointing and the retrieving, but they're also looking at temperament. So any dog that's shown to be excessively shy or aggressive would also get cut from the breeding requirements.
Yeah. So what's the training look like for the dispatching part? Like, I mean, how do you train for that?
You don't. It is very much a natural skill that the Germans expect their foresters' dogs to have. And if you think about hunting in Germany, it's much more based around wildlife management. It's a very proactively managed situation as opposed to in North America. So, they're looking at a piece of property and wanting to have an exact number of what can that land support, certain number of prey animals, certain number of predators, and it's the responsibility of the forest manager and their dog to be able to control the predator population as well. So it's a natural skill. It's just something that the dog is expected to do in a hunting situation.
And how's that test set up?
It's not.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess we call it a test, but it's something that a dog needs to have done in a hunting situation and been witnessed. It's a tough thing. It's something that, like I said, it's very much a part of the German hunting culture. It's not here. And so it's a requirement that kind of runs afoul of our typical hunting needs and hunting culture, but we follow all the same requirements. We register our dogs in Germany. They have to meet all exactly the same. So we unfortunately don't have a choice with that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So do you register your dogs in the US as well, or are they specifically registered just in Germany?
They are. They all have FCI registrations, and the FCI is the kind of the United Nations of kennel clubs. It's a governing organization of all of the kennel clubs except the US, Canada, and the UK. So everybody else trees up under the FCI. So the dogs get registered in Germany, that trees up to the FCI, and that's where their official registration is. I also register our dogs personally in NAVDA. Yep. So that we can test and compete in that, but no, the Deutsch Langhaar are just German registered and therefore FCI.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So when you look at NAVDA or NAVDA, however you say it, you'll see the German long-haired pointer, right, and then you have the Deutsch Langhaar. So what is, besides the name, if there is, what's the difference between that? And as someone that's looking at the breed, what can they expect maybe from the German long-haired pointer compared to the Deutsch Langhaar?
Sure, that's a fuzzy line, and you'll find very passionate people on both sides of the debate. Most people are more familiar with Deutsch Drahthaars and versus German wire hairs, and it's exactly the same difference where you have breeds that were brought over to America. They get bred under varying circumstances, whether breeders are kind of looking for more of a NAVDA type dog or more of a field trial type dog, and you just sort of end up going all these different directions, and it's not so tightly controlled. And so German long hair pointers, German wire hair pointers, they can be registered with the AKC. It can mean a lot of different things depending on what lines you're looking at or what specific dogs you're talking about. Using the German language name, Deutsch Langhaar, Deutsch Drahthaar, Deutsch Kurzhaar, that is how we differentiate dogs that are still registered in Germany and held to those standards. So you could say that all Deutsch Langhaar are German long-hair pointers, but not all German long-hair pointers are Deutsch Langhaar because they aren't necessarily held to all of those same breeding standards. So when you use the German name, whether it's Drahthaar or Langhaar, you're just referring to a system that has certain requirements that produces a certain product, and using that German language name is kind of the most convenient way to differentiate.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I was kind of curious if it was something with like the breeding or, but it's more So obviously, if they have just the German long hair pointer name, they haven't gone through any of the German
Right.
standards.
Right. But you know, I mean, when we register our dogs with NAVDA, that's the box that I check. So our
Yep,
dogs are GLPs in the NAVDA
for
world.
NAVDA. Yep.
But it's yeah, it's a way of defining the system that produced them. Because if you can take two Draghars or two Langhars, you can breed them, but say you didn't complete those tests, or you know they didn't receive passing scores or whatever, but you breed them anyway, those puppies genetically are Draghars or are Longhars. I mean, their
Yeah,
parents
yeah.
are each came, but because it
Didn't.
wasn't done within that system, those puppies cannot be called Draghars or Longhairs. They'd be German wire hairs or German Longhairs. And you know, people get funny because you know, well, the genetics are exactly the same. But at what point do you draw that line? Because 5 generations later, 10 generations later, you know, where do you say it's no longer that same dog? So
Yep,
that's how it's managed.
that makes sense. So when you guys were looking at getting a hunting dog, what drew you to the Deutsch Langhaars? And then on top of that, what made you guys decide to take the German route
Sure.
of a Deutsch Langhaar over just doing the German long hair pointer route?
Yeah, yeah. Um, So when we decided to get a bird dog, we were new hunters. We had started duck hunting for about a season or two. We had a Greater Swiss Mountain Dog who wasn't into wet grass, let alone water, so she was not going to be doing she was not going to be doing any retrieving for us. Um, and so when it came time to get a new dog, we thought, oh, you know, we're kind of starting to get into this hunting thing. It'd be fun to have a dog that could come with us and do the things that we like to do and add to our hunting experience. We had also gone to a learn to hunt day because we'd been doing waterfowl, and we went to an Upland learn to hunt day that our state agency had put on, and there were some German short hairs there, and they kind of set up this scenario. They planted some pheasants, and you got to go out and just seeing those dogs work was just pure magic. I mean, it just and having you know come from duck hunting, it was dry, it was sunny, it was a very reasonable middle of the day time of day, you know. I'm like, I think this upland hunting thing's for me. So we're serial researchers, and I got it sitting right here on my desk actually, but Craig's book, the Pointing Dogs Volume 1, The Continentals, that was my birthday present that year. And
Nice.
I just poured through it and I read about every single breed that there was. And there was
You can find that on Amazon, or where can you find that book at?
on
You know?
Amazon, Project Upland sells it.
Okay,
You can order through Craig's website. Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, it has every continental European pointing breeds, all the versatile breeds, and profound detail. He went to every country and you know researched where these dogs had come from and talked
Oh
to people
wow.
who owned and bred them. So yeah, it's quite a work. But anyway, I poured through it, reading about every breed, and there were a few that just really stuck out. And to be honest, it was kind of a look thing too. I like you and I talked about this, but I like the floppy ears and the long coats, and so I kind of was looking at the Munsterlanders, the German long hairs. You know, stood out. Even Brittany's. I was interested in learning more about those dogs who had the same characteristics as many of the other breeds, but I liked the look, I liked the coat. So I just started reaching out to different breeders to learn what I could, and really connected with a breeder of Deutsch Langhaar. And, you know, we became pen pals. I asked a ton of questions, and what she explained about this system that produced something really consistent. You know, we go through all this effort not because it's fun to drive 3 states away to do a weird esoteric test that you know
Yeah.
a smaller population is doing, but we do this because it's proven to work, and it produces dogs that hunt. And us being new and thinking, man, we could really profoundly screw this up, we just felt like getting a dog that was guaranteed to have the pieces meant that the errors would be on us. Like the dog had what it took, and if it didn't work out, we knew that we had done something wrong, and would have something to improve, as opposed to always wondering like, well, maybe the dog just doesn't know how to hunt. You know, to me, it was an insurance policy of getting something that was proven.
Yeah.
And we were drawn to versatile dogs because we were new hunters and we didn't really know what kind of hunting we wanted to do. People give advice like, well, find a breed that hunts the way you do. We didn't hunt, so I didn't know. And so
Yeah.
versatile sounded good. How about something that can do a little bit of everything? And that was how I got into it. And then of course, ever since then, it's been a process of discovery of some of the amazing things that these dogs can do, from blood tracking big game to small game hunting to, of course, birds and waterfowl. So
Yeah.
it's been a fun journey. Yeah.
So you got your first Deutsch Langhaar, and for short, you call them DLs, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yep. Okay.
5 years ago. Yeah.
5 years, and that was what's one is that? Her
It's
name?
Piper. Yeah,
Piper.
she's Piper, Lisa vom Koreschatten, and we call her Piper. And yeah, she suffered through brand new handlers, brand new trainers, brand new hunters. We joke about the difference between her, and then we ended up breeding her, and we kept a female from her, and that's our second female, and that's Abby. We joke that, Piper's first season, and she was young for the start of the season. I think by January she was still just 6 months old or so. So I mean, it was a young puppy season.
Yeah.
But we would go out. We didn't know where to look for birds. We would go out and we would traipse around the sagebrush and think, well, it could be birds out here. And Piper thought the game was to go out, get lost, walk around in circles, and then find the truck again. And she would be so excited to find the truck, and until we finally, kind of accidentally started bumping into some quail. Whereas Abby, her daughter, by the time we had her, and we were a lot more experienced, we knew how to put her on birds. She was born just believing that there were always birds out there, which reflects in her search and in her drive, because there's just that innate faith that that birds will be found.
Yeah. How do they hunt? Are they, do they range pretty far? Do they stay closer? What's their average?
Yeah, depending on how you want to set your scale, they're pretty medium ranging dogs. Pipers are closer worker. If we're on an open ridge with Chucker, she's comfortable working at like 150 yards, and then she'll dip down, and she's really good at searching likely cover. So she'll go 400 yards, 500 yards out to dip down into a draw and look at something that she feels looks birdie.
Yeah.
But her comfortable working range is kind of 125, 150. Abby's a little farther out, 150 to 200, pushing 250 maybe. She just has bigger legs and more run. But I grouse hunt with Piper, and she's really good at adjusting into a much closer range, where she's generally within sight or pretty close to being within sight.
And that, are you talking like rough grouse in the woods, or?
Yeah, we have. So I'm in Western Washington. We have some rough grouse on this side, and then as soon as you get over the mountain pass, really up into the mountains, you can get. We have both versions of blue grouse,
nice.
Sooty and dusky, and then there's no other grouse hunting in Washington. Our sharptails are protected, our sage are protected. But when we go to Montana and stuff, we do get into sharptails.
Yeah, nice. Oh, that sounds awesome. And as being first time bird dog trainers, getting started with your first one, obviously you ran her through the test for the German side.
Mm-hmm.
What was kind of that process? And what obviously it had to be done within that first year or the first summer of it being done. What was that kind of like, as being a new handler and taking that step to run them through the German test?
My advice to any new handlers after going through that is to do anything you can to go see a test without a dog. Just go and watch it, because I think, and maybe it's just me because I'm a more anxious person, but I feel like I spend a lot of time worrying about, am I in the right spot? Am I doing the right thing? What's happening next? Do I, where am I supposed to be here? And so having had the chance to see a test in advance, I think really helps put you at ease as far as understanding what's coming and what the day is going to look like. And in turn, that puts your dog at ease. They're very aware of how keyed up you may or may not be. So so for the human, being able to witness a test ahead of time is huge. Short of that, make sure that you're going to, if you have a club in your area that has some training days, even, we spend a lot of time with our local NAVDA chapter.
Yeah.
And that carries over. It's a lot of the same skills. It's the energy of a training day is the same regardless of what types of dogs are there. Just helping your dog to understand that there's a lot of sitting and waiting. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of people and dogs around. You need to just chill and wait your turn. I think in terms of test day prep, that's probably more important of just preparing for the temperature and emotion of the day as opposed to the skills themselves. But the puppy test, that's strictly an exposure thing. If your dog has hunted, they'll know how to search a field and point. There's a tracking a live rabbit component. So ideally, your dog's first time experiencing a jackrabbit isn't on test day. So you want to make sure you get out and have your dog have a chance to chase some rabbits and get excited about that and learn how to track. Our dogs tend to be pretty nose down hunters anyway, so tracking comes very, very naturally. But if all you know are cottontails and you show up on the test day and it's being run on jackrabbits, that can be a real shock when a huge jack gets up in front of your dog. So
that can definitely throw them off. That's crazy. So you have, let's see, are you on your second litter? You just
our second litter just went because we're co-owning one and he's here and he's 11 weeks old. So they went home 3 weeks ago.
Nice. What'd you learn from your first litter to your second litter? Any good stories or like things you learned through on?
It was 2.5 years between litters, which I think was the right amount of time for the you kind of forget about the sleepless nights and how much worrying there was. I mean, the amount of things that you can worry. To me, a litter of puppies, you just look at them and think, my gosh, there's 8 of you, there's 7 of you, how am I going to keep you all alive? And you become a little neurotic about weighing once or twice daily and charting it, so you've got a table of all their weights and stuff. But it's fun, and we were lucky both times that the moms were really, really good, really attentive, and so it was more of a management role for me than hands-on raising them. But I think the hardest part of a litter is finding really quality homes for the puppies to go to. I'm invested in these dogs and I want to know how they're doing, not only in the first week or the third week, but in the 10th year. And so finding people that really understand what they're getting into. These are intense hunting dogs. They're cute. They have floppy ears. They're, really, I enjoy having them around the house, but I think in some ways that's deceiving. There's a lot of intensity there. We talked about the hardness test. They're not labs. They're not golden retrievers. They are born to hunt. And that's one of the reasons that we have this really tightly controlled system, and the dogs only get placed in hunting homes because once you've seen one hunt, that that's what it was born to do. And to keep it from doing that is just cruel to the dog. So finding people that get that and that are really committed to developing that dog into everything that it can be, and just hunting it a ton. That's all we ask for. Just be serious about getting out and putting them on game, whatever it is, whether it's blood tracking, fur, birds, doesn't matter. They don't care, but they love to do it.
Yeah, no, that's one of the cool things that I think is someone once said on our podcast that we had on, they're like, if you want to screw up a dog breed, I can't remember exactly how they say it, but basically if you want to screw up a dog breed, bring them to the US and run them through the US stuff, and I just think it's super cool that even though the dog is in the US, right, that you're still it's still running like the German test. It's still being the dog that is across seas, that has, their programs over there are just elite, and everybody, like, even in like the golden retriever world or lab world, a lot of guys are like, oh, we get the dogs from the UK, and like they bring that bloodline over to the US because they just know that people want that, it's better, and I just think that's awesome with the Deutsch Langhaars and like that group, that you're just still so, it's a small group and it's staying extremely consistent, and there's not going to be like a veer off of breeding,
it excels at producing consistency. Now, whether that outcome is a good fit for you or not, that's different for every hunter. Not everybody wants a dog that's gonna gonna get jazzed about fur, or have that kind of intense edge that they have. But for those that it is a good fit, what it means is that, every litter that's produced, you're really getting just about the same thing. There's not a lot of personal preference or variations because they're all having to do the same things in the same way.
Yeah, I think that part's awesome. Is it just when you see one hunt and you know that it's ran through that system or through that breeding, like what is going to be coming down the
Yeah.
road, or and for me, I think it's great for the test, and I like to see that, but I also like to know how the parents of the
Hmm.
pup that I'm going to bring home hunts, how they act, and so that's like, I appreciate when I found like you guys, you take a lot of videos of what you're doing with your dogs, what you're doing with the pups,
Hmm.
and some of that stuff you're doing. I don't know if you learned that from uh, other breeders, in
Hmm.
the Deutsch Langhaar world, but I was like, oh my God, just there was one, I think you guys were already using clicker
Oh yeah.
stuff before the dogs even went home.
Hmm.
You had another video of when it was puppy feeding time, all the pups had to be quiet before you put the food down. I'm like, holy crap, like
Yeah.
that small stuff at that age, and if the person that brings it home stays consistent with that,
Yeah.
like you are gonna have not just one heck of a hunting dog, but just one heck of a home dog too, and a
Yeah. Yeah.
respectful dog, that people like to be around.
Yeah.
Uh, I
They're
just
little
think,
sponges. They really are. And you can take advantage of the pack mentality of like, when you've got seven of them and they see one of them sat nicely and got pet and like, oh, monkey see, monkey do. They can do that. I can do that too. And so you can really take advantage of that, copycat mentality at that age to teach them pretty quickly.
yeah, no, that is. Do you guys hunt much for fur then, or are you guys mainly bird
We're
hunters?
mostly birds, upland and duck. Not to say that sometimes we don't go after rabbits when the bird hunting is slow.
Yeah,
But we would like there are snowshoes in the mountains here, and we've talked about going up and learning to pursue them a little more intently. Partly for the longer season, partly for something more versatile to do with the dogs. So that's something we'd like to expand into and learn a little better. But no, we're primarily upland birds. Do try to do still a fair amount of duck hunting, but yeah, for me, you can't beat walking an open ridge, whether you find birds or not. My gosh,
yeah,
it
the
was an awesome
views
hike with
and
your dogs. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, so one of my main things for the Deutsch Longhair breed is, so I'm not a big fur hunter.
Hmm.
We do have a lot of rabbits, and I live in Iowa. We do have a lot of rabbits here. So my big concern would be when we're bird
Hmm.
hunting. I wouldn't. I'm not worried waterfowl. Right, you're pretty
Yeah.
just strict what you're doing. But let's say we're upland hunting pheasant. Um, I would. My concern would be, would they stick to just running rabbits, or do they have a pretty good gears or switches
Hmm.
to be like, oh, there's a bird over here. I'm not going to pay attention to this rabbit scent, or are they more, you know, or is it just how you train them? I guess.
Yeah, in our experience over the last 5 years, the dogs are so good at picking up on contextual clues. They're so good at picking up on what it is that you want them to do. So just like every puppy points meadowlarks, and eventually they learn, hey, you didn't get excited about it, you didn't shoot at it. Where I guess we won't worry about those.
Yep.
It can be the same if you're not targeting rabbits. If you know. Believe me, the first couple times they flush a rabbit, they will take off
Oh yeah.
after it. There will be barking. But if you never shoot, if you're never interested in it, they will pick up on that.
Yeah.
We really only got ourselves into an unwanted rabbit hunt once, and we run a quail hunt that produced no quail, and we ended up accidentally in a huge nesting colony of cottontails, and so it was, to be fair, that was sensory overload for Piper because there was like you couldn't take 3 steps and another cottontail was scooting out, so she got pretty overstimulated in that environment. But other than that, if there's birds around and that's what you're targeting and that's what you're excited about and that's what you're getting that the dog is getting to retrieve, which they are such passionate retrievers that
Right.
believe me, if they never get a rabbit shot, but you're putting a lot of birds in their mouth, that's what they'll be looking
Don't
for.
forget about the rabbits.
Yeah.
Yeah. How was so you just said they have like the natural retrieve.
Hmm.
Uh, was it a pretty seamless process of bringing out the retrieve in them to get them to retrieve? Do you guys goose hunt or anything?
We don't goose hunt, although we've ended up with a few geese that the girls have found that have been shot and lost, that
Yeah.
snow goose that they dig out of the woods, but or out of the weeds. But um, we have force fetched both dogs, or trained retrieve. I guess it wasn't a very forceful force fetch,
Yeah.
but
What
they've
method
been.
did you use for it?
We start very positive. We start with cheese, just
Yep.
teaching to hold, giving them cheese every time they do it. And then we follow it up with a near pinch, or an e-collar,
Yep.
because our HCP, that test that they have to pass, is mostly a retrieving test, and it's
Okay.
absolutely critical that that retrieve is flawless. In fact, it's so important to the system that if at any point on test day the dog encounters game, whether it's a test game that was laid out, or if there was just a dead rabbit in the field for whatever reason, if the judges see that the dog encounters game and they abandon it in the field, it's an immediate fail. Pick up your dog, go home. But end of your test. So
Oh wow.
it's an inexcusable thing to have come across something and not brought it back. So for that reason, and for us as hunters,
Yeah.
the retrieve is a non-negotiable for us. So yep, they get force fetched. They have a really, really strong natural retrieve, so then it becomes just a process of teaching them that it's never optional,
Yeah.
no matter how they feel about the situation.
Nice. No, that sounds great. That was kind of my one other thing too, just having retrievers, like
Hmm.
I like how the natural retrieve is there. And we kind of talked about that on the phone. It's just like one of my favorite parts of hunting is the finish work of the dog
Hmm.
bringing back the
Yep.
game that the whatever bird it is that they put in the air, um, or that we shot. So uh, and they have a pretty strong pointing aspect as well. How is
Hmm.
so I've never trained a pointing dog. Um, with it being your guys' first time going through that, and like uh, do they, and with it being the Germans side, you have to teach them to track hair, but then to point birds.
Hmm.
How does that differ in the training?
Um, eh, the point's natural and the tracking is natural. Like I was saying, where they're so sensitive to context. So, for example, every time we enter a field, and this is particularly relevant for a test or for training, if we're
Yeah.
entering a field and I want the dog to run around, head up, search, look for birds, we have a way that we enter the field. I put the dog on a sit. I tell her to go find the birds. And that becomes a visual and an auditory
Yeah.
clue that we're looking for birds. If I'm bringing her into a track, I will always put her on a down. So I'll give her a command to lay down. That puts her nose real close to the ground, and put my hand in front of her and tell her to track.
Okay.
And eventually they learn just that context of like, oh, I'm sitting to enter the field, or oh, I'm down on my belly and you've got my nose in the start of the track. That becomes their clue of what it is that they're being expected to do.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That makes sense. I was kind of curious how it like transition. Do they point rabbits ever, or is it mainly just
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah, and even and that's not a bad thing at all. And
yeah,
like on Abby's puppy test, so the way that you do the rabbit tracks is you get a whole line of people that just push through the sage, and as soon as they see a jackrabbit run, they raise their hand and they call a judge over, and the judge witnesses the rabbit running away, and then you bring a dog in to the start of it and see what they do to follow that scent trail. And
okay,
more often than not, when you bring that puppy into where that jackrabbit had been sitting, they'll go on point on the scent because it's just a really hot spot
yeah,
where that rabbit had been sitting, and that's great, and the judges love it, and that's not at all an undesirable thing to do. That's
yeah.
that's great that the dog is showing natural caution around
Scent.
game scent.
Yeah.
So yep.
How far do they have to track after that? situation?
It's not it's more of watching the behavior of the dog. Are they super interested in following it? Are they able to really extend out? Do they lose the track? They circle around, and when they pick it up again, do they take it a little bit further? Are they able to overcome an obstacle? So, if the rabbit ran across a dirt road and the dog just stops and just can't seem to manage going across the two track, that's not as good as a dog that is willing to just keep pushing and keep working through any sort of visual obstacles that might be there to follow that track. So with the
Okay.
jackrabbit, they're usually not going to find the rabbit at the end. The rabbit's in the next county,
Yeah.
but just showing that kind of persistence and desire and that willingness to kind of keep working at it, keep focusing, push a little bit farther, a little bit farther. That's all I want to see him do.
Yeah, for sure. What you've probably touched on a few of the things, but what's been your most rewarding piece, or the thing that you have enjoyed the most of becoming a Deutsch Langhaar owner, breeder, and just being like diving
Yeah,
deep into the breed?
yeah. That's a really good question, and the thing that comes to mind right away surprises me, and it's the people. And I'm not a people person. That's why we all love dogs, right? Because we kind of relate to them better.
Agreed.
But I did not expect when Joe came home 6, 7 years ago and said, "Hey, I think we should try duck hunting. It sounds kind of fun." At no point did I think I was going to get plugged into this incredible community, whether it's specifically the Deutsch Langhaar folks. I mean, we all get together once a year in South Dakota. We bring all of our dogs. We have like 40 or 50 Langhaar there, and we have our annual meeting and our breed show and just a big social get together. Whether it's that group or whether it's the larger German community or NAVDA, or going into Project Upland and getting connected with other dog people and other upland hunters. I did not expect this little brown puppy that we brought home to have unlocked this whole community and social network. And shoot, I quit my job to work in Project Upland full time a year ago. It was just a
That's
puppy that we
crazy
brought home.
awesome.
Yeah, it's just when you connect with something that makes sense to you, it's really easy to say, well, sure, I'll adjust my life and follow this other path that I had
Yeah.
no idea, 7 years ago that I was going to do that.
If Project Upland has an opening, let me know.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, and some people ask us about the podcast, and that's kind of what keeps us going too. Is it's opened our eyes up to just the more bird species, more dog breeds, just more people that know way more than what we do. And it's awesome to talk to individuals like yourself that are so invested in certain breeds. To you learn so much about them, and I really enjoy that part. And it's Nick, he just got his poodle pointer, and if we would have started this podcast, he's always been a lab guy, he would have never, maybe never known about him. And that's just the dog. He got to hunt with one, and he really enjoyed the way it hunted, and his wife likes the way it, how it acted and whatnot. So, he fell on that one, and said I got to look in, and I was like, man, these dogs, and they remind, like, their looks, with the fluffiness of the ears and stuff, like they remind me of a golden. And I know they don't hunt like a golden, but they kind of remind me of it. And my wife, she likes the way goldens look. So it's like, all right, which one, for me? And I like the way they look the most too. But what's, can you give us one or two of your favorite hunting stories with your Deutsch Langhaars?
There've certainly been a lot of really memorable ones. We've come a long way. The first bird that I ever shot over Piper when she was 6 months old or so, it had been a whole season with a 5, 6, 7 month old puppy, but we were committed. We were out every weekend. We were just doing everything we could. She had pointed before, and the first time she pointed, we didn't believe her because we had no idea what we were doing. And all of a sudden, you think you aren't seeing anything. You're like, there's nothing here. The dog doesn't know what she's doing. And then you walk in there and the whole covey of quail gets up. So the first time I actually shot a bird over her. She swallowed it whole, and I was convinced that we had completely ruined this dog. So now we had this, high octane puppy that had finally figured out what to do. She found the bird. I actually connected on one, and down the throat it went. So I was so embarrassed and so mortified that I didn't speak to anybody about it for a couple of weeks. I was like, I can't tell the breeder that I ruined this dog. Like I don't know how to own up to this cardinal sin. And when I finally owned up to it, our breeder said, well, maybe you might want to try hunting pheasants for a while because they're bigger. And I thought, okay, that's good advice. I guess I won't write off the next 15 years with this dog just on that experience. So that's where we started. This last season, last year's upland season for us was tough. We just had bad weather. The mountains were really snowy. Our hunting grounds got hit with a lot of ice pretty early on. So
it's tough.
About Christmas time, we had to pivot over to waterfowl hunting, which we're lucky here to have that as an option. Oh, the mountains have too much ice. Okay, great. We'll go shoot ducks. We had some really, really bang up duck days, which a good duck day makes you think you're going to, quit everything and become a duck hunter because there's nothing like it. A bad duck day is like the worst day ever because you got up at 3:00 in the morning and now you're wet and cold and have nothing to show for it. But we had some really good duck days this season, but one that stands out for me was on our way into South Dakota for DL Fest this year in November. We stopped at some grasslands, and mostly it was just to air out the dogs. We'd been in the car for the last 18 hours and just wanted to stretch our legs a little bit. And we're in new country to us. We didn't know how to hunt it. It looked like it had been grazed really, really short. We just got out to stretch, and up go this covey of sharptails, and we're like, oh. Okay.
Let's try this.
This looks like a good place to stop. So I mean, literally, the dogs just got out of the box straight from a road trip. I'm like still lacing my boots, like, okay, let's go. And we never got to that initial group, but Piper ended up finding a huge covey that had been kind of holed up in some tight cover, and she went on point, and I shot my first sharptail over her, and my husband got one out of the same flush. And
nice.
Just talk about versatility. We didn't know where to go. We just kind of pulled off the road to stretch, and the dogs were like, okay, we're on the prairie. This is cool. And a little while later, we've each got a really nice grouse in our hands, and that to me, that's just cool. Being able to show up and say, let's try this, and have it work out like that is pretty lucky and pretty cool.
That is awesome. How many miles did you run the Garmin system?
Yeah. We have an Alpha.
How many miles do they put on in an average hunt?
They very reliably do 3.5 to 4 times of whatever we do.
Okay.
And so a typical chucker hunt for us will be 8 to 10 miles. So the dogs are putting in 30 miles, 35 miles or so. Yeah.
Holy shit. Yeah. Wow. What's do you know what their average speed is by chance, or?
It's a little bit tough to say because by the time I get back to the truck and I look at the stats, we stopped for lunch halfway out there, but I typically see about maybe a 10-mile-an-hour average for their average moving speed.
Dang, that is impressive. 30 some miles in a day.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
They by the time hunting season wraps up, they are in stupid good shape. But no, they just love it. You just see them out there, and they're doing what hundreds of years have programmed them to do, and I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's super cool. I love that they have that engine in them to be able to just go and and in Iowa, it's kind of one of the downfalls of. I mean, Iowa's a fun state to hunt. Don't get me wrong, but it's kind of the downfall of it is there's not huge tracts of land to let your dog just go. You like some of our buddies, they have setters, and in Iowa they're ranging 100 to 150 yards. But then you talk to like these people that are out west with setters, and they got 600-700 yard dogs. It's like, man, that would just be as a setter owner, I'd be like, man, that would just be freaking cool to just know that your dog can do that
Totally.
and like
Totally.
see that. And you know how you said earlier how they'd range out 400 yards or whatever to check cover. Like that's cool. And the dog, like knowing that the dog knows enough to continue going, right? And isn't scared to.
Yeah. And experience teaches them a lot. You know, Piper really started coming into her own as a chucker dog by her 4th season, really, of just really starting to get that mental picture of where she should expect to find birds. And that's what really draws her out. And it's nice when she wants to run to the bottom of a draw and check it. And that means I didn't have to. I can stay up on the top of the ridge, you know. So experience is really, really what for our dogs what draws them out.
Yeah, for sure. And one last thing before we jump off, as we didn't touch on it earlier and I was going to bring it up, but is there many health issues that you guys see with it being such like a strict breeding? Is there many health issues that are, or any concerns of like, you know, a lot of like retrievers per se have cancer and all that stuff? Do you see much of that in?
I think we don't quite have enough of a population to be able to really establish trends. You know, I certainly keep tabs on, you know, when we lose a dog to one thing or another, but we don't have, and I don't want to be the person that comes on and says, oh, our breed has no health issues. Of course it does, but you know, with only, you know, so far this year we've had 4 litters born in the US, so it's not a huge population. We do something that we're keeping an eye on is juvenile cataracts. It's not a requirement to test the dogs for just the process of adding a new requirement for breed certification is a long it's a long process, so we haven't added it as a formal requirement yet. I suspect it eventually will be, but yeah, juvenile cataracts have been shown to pop up, and that's a known genetic thing. So any dog that has that would not be bred. But you can test that. You can have an eye doctor evaluate them and give them a clean bill of health when they're at breeding age. And it's a good idea to have that checked fairly routinely. So that's really the only thing that, in addition to hip dysplasia, that we are actively monitoring for. But it's really more of a population size question than anything else.
Yeah. And I think with that size breed, because what are they, like 60 to 70 pounds or something?
Yeah, our girls are like 55 and just shy of 60. The males tend to run more like 70 to 80 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah. I think with that size, there's always that potential for hip dysplasia.
Sure.
And probably the length of the dog and whatnot.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of research that's trying to figure out if, you know, how much of it's genetic, how much of it's environmental. You know, there's a lot of studies that show what happens to the dog, even in its first 8 weeks of life, can have a huge influence on it. Because hip dysplasia is looseness in the hip joint, right? So, you know, puppies that are raised on surfaces with good traction, that's better for them than being raised on slippery surfaces. So that's a tough one to pin down, but we can x-ray dogs and we can evaluate them prior to breeding them, and that's the best we can do from a genetic standpoint.
Yep, for sure. No, that's awesome. Well, Jennifer, I appreciate you coming on.
It was fun.
Talking about, you know, your experience with Project Upland, the Deutsch Langhaars. I'm sure we'll be in touch with down the road when I'm looking at more of getting another pup. But no, I appreciate it, and we'll definitely stay in touch. And again, hopefully someday our paths will cross with,
I hope so,
a deal or something. You never know.
Perhaps in South Dakota. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yep, for sure. So awesome. Well, I won't keep you any longer, and have a good night.